This video is about the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Uh, Want to share some thoughts about it and some principles. These are not going to be an exhaustive list, and you might reach different ideas yourself. More than anything, I want to just demonstrate a method of how to really learn from a book like this and from the books that we use in the program. Remember that two things that we do are bottom up reading, which means that you are involved with material that is full of detail, full of the the the, the flow of a story, um, a lot of information. And if you're not in a traditional setting where you're studying it and taking notes and thinking about it and talking about it and reviewing the notes and memorizing the information and somehow using that to demonstrate mastery, uh, as you would in a traditional classroom. Um, if we're not doing that, then how do you use books like this to be an instrument for your growth, for your education? Um, well, some things to really accept is that the pacing is going to be fast, especially if you access this material through an audiobook. Um, you might feel that after listening to an hour, you maybe got 80% of it, of a story like this. The audiobook might be a little more complex and less narrative driven and more information filled. And for some of those audiobooks, you might feel after listening to an hour that maybe you can get 20%. So the point might be, well, what am I really getting from this, and how am I going to retain this information? Because it all seems to be moving a little too quickly. And I think that's a valid question. How do we really use this sort of approach and this sort of material to be part of programs that are going to develop you? What is being developed? Well, it's not necessarily your ability to retain information, although more than a few people I know have really good memories, and they can benefit from that. But more than anything, it's about being able to control your existence in the world of texts and of information, and being able to be okay with getting 10 or 15% of something that you are listening to as an audiobook, or 20 or 30% of it, hopefully a little bit more, with the understanding that if you didn't listen to it as an audiobook, you might never get through it. So you're taking what you can in a busy life to continue personal growth. And more than that, if you're able to do bottom-up reading and cross-category connections, we'll talk about those in just a second, you can feel maybe a bit more confident that you are learning some valuable skill sets, and that it's not necessarily about knowing the content of the book a year later. It's about having this habit of controlling and filtering information, okay? And of finding ways to remember important things. If you look at the whole book and you say there are three things that I'm going to take away from me, for example, concerning Evicted, what if you said to yourself, there are going to be three things I need to remember for this book? Do you have the ability to find those three things, given your vision, your path, what you believe you are doing in the world, right? So, what is bottom-up reading? That is to listen to something like Evicted, to read it, and from the details and the descriptions and the activity that's happening in the story, right? That's sort of the bottom layer, if you will, to find ideas or concepts that rise above the details, that somehow become a bit more universal and generalized and float above it as principles. So as you are examining, maybe you can imagine yourself examining this on a table, and all this information is laid out on the table, and you are looking over it, and you're trying to lift a few things up above to a different layer of of abstraction and generality, so that you can develop principles, right? So when you work through bottom up reading, when you do that technique, you are willing to jump into a book full of narrative details like this, and you are looking for ways to develop hypotheses, if you will, concepts, principles that you're going to kind of recognize as more universal and general, and then you can test them, right? Once you can see what those principles are, you can hold them sort of in a working space, if you will, a working principle, and then you can test them with your own experiences and with other books that you read and movies that you watch to see if it really is a principle that shows you how people operate. See, that's really what this program is about. Is about you learning how to use books, movies, documentaries, discussions, websites, audiobooks, handheld books, film, YouTube, to learn how people operate and to learn how to influence people, to learn how to watch yourself as a person, to direct yourself, to discipline yourself, to learn what it means to be human, and then to be able to take that understanding and apply it to the communities that you are in so that you can bring some good and hopefully more than just a little bit of good to the community so that your words can be filled with mercy and hope and direction and truth and beauty, right? And so you know when to speak, when not to speak. You know when to qualify a statement, when to let it stand as an absolute principle. And so you were really in a program that once that we develop, you are learning much more than anything how to be at home in the world of ideas and words, not how to remember specific content. All right. So I do recommend as you read material and watch material, as much as you can afford it to buy the hard copy, to buy a cheap DVD copy, or that's going out of t- t- technological style, but to somehow have a way to remember the books that you have. And for me, it's having them on a literal bookshelf. And just as I look at the bookshelf, um, I can remember what I learned from those books. Believe it or not, it actually does work more than you might think it would work. Now, as for movies, I have to tell you, I have a couple DVD players, and I've just sort of invested in the notion that because this is your last physical format of the movie, I do believe that the DVD is going to be probably the last physical format of movies. I can find a ton of cheap DVDs, and people are just trying to get rid of them. Libraries are basically giving them away in their annual library sale. So, that allows me to pick up copies of these very important movies that are part of the program, and I can rewatch them. But more than anything, the shelf is there. I see it every day, and I remember the movies. So that works for me. You've got to figure out a way to ingrain these principles and to remember that, hey, you read Evicted. Hey, you read 20 other books or whatever, and to remember the titles and to think of them as friends, as people, and to remember their personalities and how they interacted with you, how they made you feel, how they made you think. That really is the education that we're after. Okay. So take heart. You might read this book and you're like, wow, this is blowing my mind right now. How am I gonna? What should I even be looking for? Yeah. It's working. It's working. Just read and continue reading. Watch and continue watching. Listen and continue listening. Give yourself 3, 4, 5 years of that. You're going to be a different person on the other end, even if you've never taken a single note. Because as we live life, and as we do these types of very flexible and unique and tailored programs, we are not counting on the fact that the majority of you are going to be able to sit down and take 20 minutes of notes a night. Your life is very busy. The point is, how do you stay in tune with the ideas that you should be thinking about and stay connected to texts as you live a busy life? So I try to be as polite as I can when I'm interacting with students, but I will never really accept the excuse that they're busy, right? I want to know what are you watching, what are you reading, and if someone comes back and says, "Well, I've been really busy," I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to work with you, but that's not really a good excuse because we're all busy." That's the point: is how do you watch a movie, read a book while you're busy? And if you think you're busy now, wait until 3 or 4 years, when maybe you have children, a family, whatnot. So if you let this idea that you're too busy really be a serious something that you seriously believe in, then you will probably never develop as a reader, watcher, writer, because there's probably not going to be a less busy season in your life until maybe towards the very end. Okay, so you kind of do have to make a decision that the whole busyness thing is not a real excuse. You still have to grow intellectually. You have a duty to do that. All right, so you got to figure out how to make it work. And you got to figure out the downtimes in your day and use those, or whatever. I think this, I'm digressing a little bit here, but um, as you live through the books and the movies, find time for them, do them, you will grow. All right, you will grow, but you're not going to do it if you watch one movie a month. Okay, so and you read one book, 3 books a year. That's not enough. So, well, let's get back to Evicted. All right, so the bottom up reading and then cross category connection. So this is about identity. This is about community. Uh, this is a little bit about race. This is about how cities operate, right? Um, it's also about business, okay? It's also about education. It's also about the law. You see how the book starts, you know, moving and connecting different categories of thinking, or of study. You might say, well, let's study history, and then let's study business. Those two things are different disciplines, different classes, if you will, in school. Well, this is a book about history, especially if you allow history to be a general concept that covers things like community, civics, society. Um, well, that's this, right? And then it's business because you can watch the landlords do what they're trying to do, landowners, landlords, and make money out of the poor, right? Well, let's go ahead and move in and talk more about some specifics that are from Evicted. Now, I do have a little note sheet here. If I can actually read my writing, that would help. So let's see what I have here. I want you to notice that Matthew Desmond does an incredible job with writing this book. He spent years studying Milwaukee, and he has some conclusions that he's reached, and he's tried to see if at least in terms of the numbers they match other larger cities. So there's a point in the opening of the book when he's going to talk about Milwaukee in relation to other cities in the nation. But he's very careful to for the vast majority of his claims to say this is not something that we should think about universally just now. This is something I found studying Milwaukee, and it makes sense that given the racial disparities in Milwaukee and the rich poor divide, and especially the activity that's happening in the poor section, that other cities in this way are going to operate the same or similarly. But Milwaukee does have some pretty strict laws protecting landlords. Also, some pretty strict laws protecting the renters. So, not every city is going to have those same sets of laws. So, what can be said about Milwaukee is not necessarily something that can be said about the United States as a whole, but what can be said about some general activity and maybe the way we try to profit off situations like this can be generally accepted with some caution. Okay, so what I'm saying is he's not quick to jump to just broad universal conclusions. Okay, now he's also very careful to tell you how he got the information, what he did. You can look at the front matter of the book and the back matter, the pages in the front and the back that discuss the research methodology, and you can get a bunch of the notes that he uses and all of that in the back. So that's very, very helpful. Now he's an ethnographer. Okay, so he's going to study um, uh, it's sort of a mix of society, politics, psychology, urban studies, but through the eyes of people on the ground. All right. So this is why you get the stories. This is why you get this in-depth look at somebody's life. This is not a statistician. This is an ethnographer. Okay. Now, if you're not already familiar with the term, I would pause, look it up online, ask your phone, read about it. That's another way that these programs are meant to work. You need to take control of your ignorance, okay, and change it. You can't depend on us. You're allowing yourself to be in a very passive situation if you aren't asking questions and then trying to pursue the answers on your own. If you continue doing that, then as soon as you finish this program, your education is probably going to finish because you don't know how to be in charge of it and to push it forward on your own. So you need to be asking questions. You need to be hitting pause. You need to be asking AI for the answers. You need to be doing it that way. That's aggressive and that's active. And that's the type of thinker that we want to produce, okay? Not someone that can sit back and say, oh, let my mentor tell me what to do, and let him tell me what to think, or let her tell me, and then I'll whatever they tell me to do, I'll do, and then I'll turn it in, and I'll get no. That's way too passive, and you're not learning how to be a self-directed self-learner, okay? So yeah, if you don't know what ethnography is, go look it up and then come back. All right. So we've all been there. We've all learned how to do this. Okay. The people on my team, and we're trying to teach you. Okay. Now, um, very readable book. I appreciate that. He knows who his audience is, and he knows what type of language to use. Um, he knows when to define terms. As you listen or read this book, you're going to realize that there are very few times when you are genuinely confused about something, like how something works or like that. So that's a mark of someone who knows how to think like their audience. First, they know who their audience is. The lay person, the non-ethnographer, who is still interested and intelligent and willing to read. Okay, so you don't have to speak down to them, but you know, you shouldn't assume that they just know things that you've learned after 5 years. So he's very good at knowing when to slow it down and explain something to you, right? Now, I do wonder about how he gets information concerning the way someone might be feeling as an eviction happens or as they're being driven to the courthouse. As you listen to the descriptions, there are times when he seems to delve too much into the interior spaces in terms of, like, how do you actually know that that's what they said and how they said it in the closet, that they were in, or as they were standing in the street watching their possessions be piled up on the curb. How do you know that that's what Arlene was thinking, right? And Matthew might say, well, because I talked to her and I spent 5 years talking to these people, and this is what, okay. At that point, I would say, well, to me, that's good enough, but I would just be a little careful, because sometimes a little bit of a line can be crossed. And if you think about it, it really doesn't do anything bad to anything. It doesn't really undercut any of the conclusions or anything. It makes the book much more readable, but you have to be careful with crossing that line, because if you do it too often and too nonchalantly, it can become a habit, and one then begins guessing, at what people are feeling, and then presenting it in writing as if that's what they really said or that's what they really felt. I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes, although it makes for a great reading experience, there are times in this book where the information that is passed from one person to another seems to be so personal and emotionally laden that, unless Dresman was actually there in the room, one wonders, how do you know? And if you ask someone 2 years later how they felt, then you have the eyewitness problem, which is counterintuitive. You think an eyewitness problem is very reliable, but in fact, the amount of mistakes that people interject into their account as they look back 2 years ago, even if they saw it in person, is stunning. So as someone self-reports, to self-report means, like, if you were to tell someone how you felt, what you were going through for that event, or so many times we tend to doctor the self-reporting to make ourselves maybe not look so embarrassing or pathetic or problematic. I don't know. Many times we do try to present ourselves in, I wouldn't say the best light, but in less negative ways than was actually the case. For example, how many times have you talked to someone who has just had a rip-roaring argument with person X, and they're always, it does seem like, they were completely in the right and person X was completely in the wrong, and you kind of know in the back of your mind that it's more complicated. Now, I do think that Dresman really does preserve the complexity of this, and I appreciate that. Now, what about some principles that I would pull out of the details? Now, this video is going a little bit long, and I don't want to present this as if these are all the principles, right? I'm just telling you, as I listened to this and thought about it. Here's some things I'm gonna talk about. It does seem that when you get on the ground like this, and you have a lot of players, you have a lot of laws, you have money that might come in and may not, right? You have a lot of conditions. Then what really is at play here is the hustle, right? I mean, the renters are trying to stay in. They're trying to get the rent. They're trying to get the rent together. They're trying to fix the windows. They're trying to unplug, get the landlord to board up the hole or unplug the sink. The landlords are trying to make sure that the renters are not going to get ready to disappear on them. They're not trying. They're trying to make sure that the renters don't burn the place down, which a house does end up burning down. They're trying to make sure that a renter doesn't get ready to stay an extra, bring in two other renters or people that weren't on the lease that could wreck the apartment. And everyone knows how to use the laws. Watch how maybe the mother of someone who's about ready to get evicted actually calls the city inspector, so the inspector can come and inspect the building and maybe punish the landlord. The mother of the renter was trying to leverage some rules and regulations to pressure the landlord, right? Then the landlord is also realizing, well, I know that I will definitely collect, the money that's coming because of their, city provided aid, SSI, or, the money that they're going to get from the county or the state. I know I can garnish, I can get that. I can take their tax returns. I can garnish their wages. They're figuring out, if I send them the letter to the police department and they approve it, then I can evict them right away. They're figuring out how to use the laws to make a living or make a business or have a life, right? Have a roof over their heads. So there's this incredible hustle. And, I want to be more specific with that principle, but right now I'm just recognizing that, right? And the sort of the economies that happen in that basic lower level, right? So there's a lot of informal things that are at play before the legal aspects come in, and the more that the participants are informed about what they can do and can't do, the more that you have a situation that is full of stress, right? And full of apparent connection, but genuine opposition. How many times does Sharina, the landlord, initially start off feeling positive towards someone, but then quickly, within 2 or 3 months even, the relationship disintegrates? And how many times are they still able to talk to each other as friends, but in a very blunt way that says, I'm not against you personally, but I've got to get you out of here, right? This can't be going on. And even the renters understand that sort of exchange. And so that would be a principle, the principle of the hustle, I think shame, I would like to look at the role shame plays in here, the shame of the landlords and how they can quiet it, how they can get together in groups and chant to each other, this is my property, right? This is my property. This is my property. Remember how they did that in the landlord meeting, versus, the renters who in fact are sort of feeling that maybe they deserve to be evicted. So the shame that plays into there, right? That's a principle. So you got the hustle, the shame. What do you call someone who seems to constantly be in trauma mode? I mean, this person cannot get out of the firing line of the next mini disaster. They finally fix the car, and then they have a health problem. And then when they get better, their parent dies. And then when that happens, the weather comes and rips off the roof. And then when that happens, they lose their job because of something beyond their control. I've run into people that seem to go from one tragedy to another, and I don't know how to explain it, but it seems like they are magnets for this. Okay, so I've got the hustle, I've got the shame, I've got the magnet. Notice how I'm just trying to put one word to this, and as I think about this book, I will try to elaborate on those words because I want those principles to be a little bit more articulate. But We're doing this on the fly. All right, we're doing this as we walk from one place to another in our life, and as we're on the journey, we're trying to learn and trying to grow. So, what are the principles that you can pull out of this, and how can you frame it initially in an easy way so you can remember it, and then go from there. So, maybe let me see if we can do one or two here. Um, well, I liked the distinction they made between stable poverty and grinding poverty. Um, I appreciated the way that they showed the mental health situation that comes into play between Crystal and I believe Arlene. Crystal struggling with bipolar. So what effect uh, does not having a home and having all that stress and being hungry exacerbate mental illness, right? So there's a cause and effect situation here. Does mental illness cause someone to become homeless, or does homelessness cause someone to become mentally ill, or is it a recycling symbol? Maybe I'll just use the word recycling here. I don't think that's maybe a merry-go-round. Maybe what can I use to say sometimes mental health causes homelessness, sometimes homelessness causes mental health. It goes both ways, right? And it gets very complicated. So, what symbol can I use for that? That's something that I would try to find so that I can think and remember the principle after I leave the book. Because again, I'm not taking notes as I read. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And so, how do I learn when it's got to be done in a very quick way, right? So, I've got to have these images or these one word or two word, a sort of mnemonic devices or starter, arrows, starting places, so that I can continue profitably to think about this book the next time I have some free time in my day, right? So the biconditionality of it, the double arrows, let's just call it that, the arrows, okay, the arrows. So and then what about the grinding poverty? Why don't we say the grindstone? Okay, so I've got these words now that I can just remember. And this is not the only way to do this, but this is a start, right? Because again, I'm trying to read this book and find principles that I can take with me. Okay, and the last principle I want to mention here that really stood out for me is this notion, right, that sometimes people become poor, right, because they throw away money, but don't forget that sometimes people throw away money because they are poor. Okay, now what would be the principle there? Is the principle is or the idea is I'm never going to make enough money. I'm never going to have a house. Um, I'm never going to have a genuine retirement plan. So why should I ever save for that, right? Why not do something that helps me just feel like a human as I live? How about I have miniature vacations? How about I take the money that someone might say, well, put it towards your schooling or your retirement or towards a house, and I'm like, it's so far out of reach for me. I can see people in this situation saying that. It's like, well, instead, why don't I take this $100 and just do something that will help me survive the next month by giving me a moment of, whatever someone gets from a vacation. Now, remember that Quentin and Sharina did have a vacation to Cancun, right? And that's placed there for a reason, okay? A good writer like Matthew Desmond is never going to bring that sort of thing in without using it. He's using it to show you how that lifestyle is creating tension, right, and mistrust, right, because these renters are so poor, and their bathtubs are so clogged, right, and here are their landlords off in Cancun for a week, and that's why they're not returning the call. And in the trailer park, people are watching Tobin make over, they think, $1 million a year. It's really more like $400,000 a year, but they can't even pay for their storage. So there's that tension, right? And it's not, Matthew Desmond is careful to say it's not always in place and it's not always right, because you do have at least one renter that said, I don't care how much he makes as long as he, doesn't evict me, a Tobin in the trailer park. But But this notion that when you are living in grinding poverty, right? What's the point of saving? If your house is burning down and all you have is one cup of water, are you really going to throw it on the house? Why don't you just drink it and enjoy it? It does nothing when you throw it on the house, right? So you know, that's something to think about, because that principle can apply to other areas, right? That's what I mean when it goes cross category. Here we're talking about the poor and their money, but it could also be about time management for people who have no goals. They have no idea where they're going. Why would they ever try to discipline themselves with their time? You see what I'm saying? So that's a principle that teaches you about people. Okay, listen, this video has gone to 30 minutes. Thank you very much for watching. I hope there was something I said that's profitable. I don't prep a lot with these videos. At most, I'm going to come in with a kind of a ratty looking card that I may or may not look at as I do the videos. But part of that is I've got reasons for that. One, I need to do these in a busy life, so I'm not going to try to make them perfect. Second, I want you to see how real thinking is happening with me, and how I'll form half-baked conclusions, and as long as I can admit they're half-baked and they're still on the path to more refinement, you get to see the modeling, right? I'm trying to model what this sort of on-the-go thinking looks like, okay, and how it can work. So, my job here is not to get you to have all the content I have up here to somehow get that. My job is to get you to value learning and to figure out how it's going to work for you and to be more active and aggressive about it, right? So I need to model that in my life. And as you see someone else trying to do it, you maybe take heart and continue on trying to do this. So now Evicted is like the perfect book to help you with this. All right. A lot of core concepts and ideas, a lot of great information, not overwhelming like a textbook or like a book that focuses on abstract topics that themselves can be very, information laden. And some of those books are great, but some of them, this one flows right, and it's a great catalyst for conversation, for thinking, for conversations you can have with yourself. One of the best books to use in the program here. Also, I admit, a heartbreaking book, and that should be something to think about too. I'm not going to go into depth with this, but what do you do with the pain of the world, and how much can you look at it until it has an adverse effect? We want to use this book to grow and to move forward, but it's hard. It's hard when you see the pain that is happening to people. And maybe this can develop empathy. We are not after raw intelligence. We are not after memorizing trivia. We are not after being the smartest person in the world. We are after training you how to grow in wisdom. And that does involve intelligence and being aware of your station in the world. You are a person, you're interacting with people, so it involves knowing them at a deep level and knowing yourself. But all of this has the goal of love and of graciousness and kindness and bringing good to the place you're at. And one of the things you need to have there is your ability to feel other people's pain. Don't let it overwhelm you, but don't ignore it. Okay? And in many cases, be aware that it could have been reversed. You could have easily been someone who was experiencing this in some way. So mercy, kindness, gentleness, that has to go hand in hand with genuine education. Okay, very hard to test, very hard to teach. That's why I think most of our major colleges and universities have completely ignored mercy, kindness, gentleness from the curriculum. But you can't have wisdom without also having kindness and humility and patience. So let's grow in that without being overwhelmed, and this is a great book for it. Okay, thank you again for watching.